All right, welcome to Chatty Caxy. Today on the podcast, or whatever we're calling this, we have Brayden, Katie, Josh, Chris, and me, Mike. And we've got some topics to go over today. And one of them, in the last couple weeks, and who knows for posterity how long ago this will have been, there's been an interesting court case ruling where LinkedIn lost to their competitor. I'm blanking on what they're called, but they're a competitor that's sort of like scraping business professional data. And they took it to the Supreme Court to say, hey, that's our data. You can't have that. And Supreme Court, I think the Ninth Circuit got pushed down. The Ninth Circuit said, actually, no, if it's publicly accessible, and I think the phrase they use, and if this is a legal phrase or not, was gates up or gates down, meaning if it's open and you and I or anyone could kind of go there and see it, then that's data that you could go grab. And I think as developers and as a company sort of in, loosely in that space, it does impact us. I had a hot take on it, but I'll save mine because Josh, it sounded like maybe you had something that you thought struck your fancy that we could chat about too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. In hearing the ruling, I immediately went to essentially thinking about how that affects your security of your web server and whether, and not even about scraping necessarily, but just about the fact that in theory they could say that the IPs from this HiQ company are malicious, and they have a firewall that blocks their traffic to their site or something like that. And so I wonder too if there may be some regulation or something related to whether or not you can even block traffic to your site, because I think that's also part of it, is that they were blocking their crawlers from being able to crawl their site. And so how do they how do they actually go about making sure that LinkedIn is not blocking the crawlers to their site, even though that's a pretty common thing nowadays with DDoS attack prevention and everything like that. So that's kind of where I was thinking about going. But in terms of like whether or not it should be valid, I do kind of agree that if it's public out there and it's accessible, and Googlebot is crawling it, I don't see why you couldn't go and crawl that. I think where it comes, where there's some question is whether you can then publish that content as that you just crawled on your site, because then I think there's some implications with duplicate content and things like that could harm LinkedIn technically.
Yeah, I keep going back and forth on this because it's like, as a consumer, I would prefer if they couldn't crawl all of my data off of LinkedIn. That'd be kind of nice. Just leave it alone. I'll get to you if I want you to have it. Otherwise, hands off. But I guess also as like an open information and kind of like an open net person, like I'm also for it, like in a sense. So I'm definitely conflicted.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know the answer to this, but like kind of like with Twitter, you can make your profile private. Can you be invisible on LinkedIn if you so choose? I don't know if I know the answer to that.
You can make your profile
partially.
Where they have to be logged in at least to see it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's a way to say you can only see my profile if we're connected. I'm sure that there is, though. I would be surprised if there wasn't.
I wonder, because like when you search, like if you're a narcissist and you search your name on Google, like I do occasionally, you'll see like you can see the profile, right? You can see that. And the thing I was curious about is like, okay, so they get your name and like your your profile data. Maybe they can get an email or something, but you're also in some ways like producing content on LinkedIn. Also, I know there's a service we looked at where. One of the things that they were looking at as an indicator of whether someone was going to change a job was, could we diff out your LinkedIn profile? If you were updating your profile, people don't pay attention to their profile for years, and all of a sudden they start like updating projects and background. It's like, oh, maybe they're looking for a job, and like so now someone's capitalizing on that kind of data. That's sort of, that's kind of crossing that line Brayden was talking about. There's some things you're kind of like, okay, I prefer you don't, but that's sort of an interesting tell. I thought was kind of interesting.
It's almost, I feel a little bit like in this era of data and social media that like you almost have to expect that if you have your data up publicly on any sort of social media site, whether that be for your career as in LinkedIn or just general information and content sharing like the Instagrams and the TikToks of the world, that people are going to be able to find your information and access at least the parts of it that are there and obvious.
Yeah, I don't know. I this kind of makes me think about the far future of the internet and what it might look like, and I kind of feel like at some point the majority of the traffic is going to be something like a bot that crawls content, like probably the vast majority of it, and a small percentage of it will be, actual human activity. And in some ways, I kind of feel like a ruling like this, even if it was against it, I don't really think it would do much to deter that eventuality. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case. And like Katie said, I feel like if there is information about you, especially now, if you put it out there willingly on the internet, someone can access it, whether legally or not. But it makes me think about, like, a future where you don't have a choice. There is information about you, and it's accessible, and there's not really anything you can do about it.
That's fine. So that I love that you went there, because the thing that came to mind for me about this ruling was that same thing about bots. And if anything, for me, the specific case of sort of the Cold War of CAPTCHA is what I'll call it. And we've all seen, like, over the years, like, it starts with nothing. And I came across this a while ago, but like and one of you guys will correct me, whatever the original file transfer protocol was, not FTP, something else. It was like no password, just open channel, here's a file, grab it, and then sort of you upgrade to FTP with a password, then you upgrade to SFTP with a password. And you look at the CAPTCHA stuff now, and I saw one the other day where, like, the colors were reversed out, and it was like kind of like a negative image, and it was asking for like some kind of like hard to identify thing. Like, these are getting hard for a human. And there's that funny commercial out there right now. I think it must be like a Geico or something, where there's like a actual robot going, is that an S? Like, that's sort of that Cold War. And as developers, like, I don't think we've had to do that, but whenever I come across a site that's like somehow it's captured like super deep into it, I'm like, are people spending time developing bots to somehow get to like level 6 of this website? And maybe they are. So I don't know if you have thoughts about it, but I think you're right. Like, the bot traffic has to be increasing. And we had a client this month got a huge hosting overage because more than half their traffic was a collection of bots. It wasn't a DDoS. It was just like everything from Ahrefs to Google to all these things, and that's over half though was what their bill was. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. And even just watching the access logs on a random server on a site that isn't large, you just watch those access logs and you see tons of bots hitting them with all sorts of vulnerability checks and everything too. So it's the security alone is causing so much traffic to servers, where I feel like it is just the constant battle of bot detection and essentially presenting challenges to bots and everything like that. And it's similar to the viruses and the battle of like the antivirus and viruses, where it's just kind of a constant one up each iteration. But yeah, as the bots continue to get smarter and smarter, it's going to be more challenging, and you have to start doing pretty outrageous things. I was thinking about what might you do to prevent someone from crawling the content on your site, and I'm sure that there's plenty of things that you can do in terms of making the DOM structure totally dynamic or randomized, randomizing class names and everything like that. There's certainly plenty of ways to prevent someone from in theory, being able to crawl it consistently. But I think ultimately you can't prevent them from just being able to grab the content that was served up on the page, just because that's what a browser's doing. So, it's similar to NFTs, where there's nothing that prevents someone from just right click and save image as, and now they have that same image that, in theory you own, but you don't actually necessarily, own it to yourself only. Other people can still grab it.
All right, so that you bring up an interesting question for me. So I am I don't do a lot of development, but I am not a front end developer. For me, a randomized front end DOM sounds terrifying to me. So in that dystopian Skynet future that Chris was describing, how would you guys as front end people developing a front end. How would you make it the hardest you can think of for something to be scraped? Your randomized DOM sounds kind of fun and makes for a terrible internet in some ways. But like, what would you do to make it really hard for a bot?
I mean, with how like image processing's going, does that actually make it any harder? Like you said, like
Oh,
with the
God, that's
screenshot,
interesting.
Oh, yeah.
like you can just train an AI to just read the screenshot like nothing.
Oh my
That
God.
might almost be easier than training a crawler
If
or
you're
like
right.
programming a crawler at this point. Is just
Yeah.
taking a screenshot of each page or each profile and then processing them later.
And if you guys remember when self-driving car technology first started to like come around, and they're like, oh, we're going to have to put magnetic strips in the roads or rails or these other things, and then someone's like, how about just vision? You know, like that's how people do it, right? You know, let's go down that technology road. Yeah, you're right. So why bother if you can just do OCR on something?
Ultimately, then the only protection is probably like if people are that interested, it ends up being legal. Like you're just going to have to
Yeah.
do some kind of data ownership thing, I suppose, where like then it's just a matter for the courts, and I'm sure that'll be easy,
Crazy.
right?
All right, Chatty Caxy, change the topic. Have we squeezed all the juice out of that one? What's the point in your mind that you decide, all right, it's time to go to the Google and perhaps Stack Overflow? And what do you search for, and how do you know what you're looking at could be a promising solution?
I don't tend to go to Google or Stack Overflow for at this point for like programming questions. It's more like tech stack questions, like configuration stuff that is just bewildering to me, and that's kind of the stuff that like now is changing more frequently, I think, than the languages themselves. It's like every few months there's a new major contender in especially in the front end in the like popular tech stack, and getting all of those things to play nicely with each other in any environment is not always the simplest thing. So that's normally where I go, and then of course I always end up on Stack Overflow and definitely judge answers by how old they are, how many upvotes they have, how much discussion there is in the comments about it. But even then, sometimes the top 2 or 3 answers just don't lead anywhere, and you've got some kind of like onion of problems that you have to get down through.
I also end up on GitHub issues a lot too when it's specific to like a certain library or package that we're using.
Sure. Yeah.
And often I'll just go to the repository and just look in the issues and use the search on GitHub in their issues. Just because if I have a question on this package, I'm sure that someone else out there has already asked the same question. And oftentimes there's 3 different issues that you have to kind of follow the thread on. It's certainly not as easy to find the answers on GitHub issues as nearly as quickly because they don't rank them as an accepted answer or upvotes, but that certainly I've been doing that more often. I think just because I find the answers quicker when it's specific to a package. But for me, if I get an error message and it's usually it's a decision point of is this an error message related to my code? Or is it an error message related, like, specific to a package or, node itself? Once it's that, then I just grab that error message and I search that. And, usually you just prepend the tech stack name, like, express and blah, blah, blah. And then usually I'll be able to find it pretty quickly. But as Chris mentioned, I think an important thing with Stack Overflow is certainly the comments. I think those are usually pretty telling, and also it's not always the accepted answer at this point, because I feel like sometimes the accepted answer or the most upvoted answer is actually pretty outdated, and there's now a new answer that is going to become the accepted answer later, but is now either more upvoted or just more relevant. So definitely searching through and scrolling down that page is pretty important.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with what Josh and Chris have said so far. I feel like I more frequently nowadays end up looking up issues with errors with packages and compatibility and, like weird setup things or something like that, more than just the general day-to-day ones. And depending on what it is, depends on how I go about it. It like Josh mentioned, if it's like an error, I usually will just like dump it into Google, because sometimes people write blog posts about their errors and I don't even necessarily need to go look in Stack Overflow. I usually just kind of like skim my results and go from what seems like the most promising. I also like for times when I do look up like how to do something, there's Google gives you the people also ask, and like sometimes the meta data that gets pulled in is actually helpful for what you're looking for. So I really enjoy that sometimes as well. And yeah, the GitHub issues will save your life looking through those for sure, especially when it's something like that's like not familiar, that's new to a project or new to a tech stack. I think of the other week when we were setting up that Angular project and digging into like Angular material and getting all these like weird issues for how things have to be set up and scoped for those. And I was like having to go through all these issues for like, what's the norm with this?
Brayden, how about you?
Yeah, I don't know if I have like a whole lot more to add. I don't know if this is also the most efficient, but I like to open up like the first like 6, like whatever it is, like Google, like drop in an error message or something. It's like I just open up the first 6 and it's like, I take a pass. It's like, which one sounds the closest to what I'm dealing with? Because a lot of the times it's like, you can quickly tell when something's just like the wrong package, but the same error message and stuff like that. And then try to like skim down. And then, and then I start tackling like, the comments and the scores and trying to make sure to double check the dates or versions and things, like any of those little details that people add in to try to narrow it in. And then it gets significantly harder on older and older things, which, I mean, is just bound to happen. But as soon as something gets like a certain age old, and it's like not even that long, just like a couple of years, like it really starts to find, or it's really hard to find anything on like packages or things at that point.
Chris, I would love to hear more about your example of kind of looking at a tech stack and how things work together. What sounds like that might have been a recent example. What was something that you're like, I'm looking to make all these pieces work together, that you figured out a way through internet help?
Well, at first I have to say that Katie's comment about blog posts reminded me of the thing where you're looking for a recipe and you land on a blog post and you have to read somebody's life story before you get to it. I have that experience frequently, I feel like, on tech blogs where it's just like, I was doing this, well, whatever I was doing, and I'm like, I don't care. Just explain the problem and the solution, that's what I need. But, the project I'm working on right now is a TypeScript project, and while I have some experience with it, I don't have a lot of experience. And it's also a MongoDB project using Mongoose, and kind of the same thing. With all of those things, I have some experience, but all of them together, I have no experience. And so it was really interesting getting all of those things to work. And TypeScript, I find the community involvement and support for TypeScript is pretty high. If you want to do something TypeScript, chances are there are types there for it. All you have to do is know where to look to get them. But yeah, I can't remember a specific problem I had with getting that tech stack to work, but it's been interesting. But I think now it's all the pieces are together. But Stack Overflow was visited often during the first couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Your note about the blog post reminded me that, on Stack Overflow, I almost never read the question. I just scroll right down to the answer, and I'm like, does this look right? And I think that comes certainly with experience too, of just like pattern recognition of just, I don't know how many times I've opened Stack Overflow, but it's got to be, hundreds of thousands, millions probably. But that's a quick way too. Like Brayden said, opens the first 6 results. Just the other week I found out that there's a point in Chrome where you can have too many tabs open where it no longer shows your tabs opening. And so I hit that point and I was just like, I had no idea. I was trying to open a new tab and it just wouldn't pop up there. But it turns out it did open. I just had to what is that? Control tab over. So that was fun.
So really over the limit then.
Wow, what's the number?
I don't know what the number was, but I had some group tab groups open, and those take up a decent bit of space. So I bet you it was probably related to that. I think, but probably 200 or something.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Wow. It's funny when you're talking about scanning down. One of the things I think I do a mini quick code review as I'm scrolling down, and that just looks like bad code, so I'm skipping over that. It's all just one indent, bad looking variable name, so I'm going to skip that one. I stumbled onto that blind squirrel finds a nut joke. Today I was looking at something for a client, and it had I think it was Katie was name of platform error, and it was put this one line on 186 of this file and everything's fixed. I'm that can't be right, and it was. So sometimes you find one. I'm curious for you guys. Have you ever asked a question or or added a response on Stack Overflow?
I've gone to so many times, but then I realized that you need some sort of credibility to even post, right? To comment. So
they make you answer a bunch of things.
Yeah, so I've never posted, but I've gone to many times.
Chris, you were nodding. What's your
my my last question to Josh's point about? Basically everything's been asked already, but my last question was in 2010. Let's see. I don't even know if it's
so prior decades.
Let's see. I've got one in March.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the last one. Loading an image Ajax versus regular old JavaScript. That's what I was doing in 2010.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah. Actually, wow, this is crazy. I didn't know this. I have one from 2009 that has 42,000 views.
Wow, nice.
I can access a subversion repository using a local path in Windows. Yeah, SVN.
Wow.
Pre-Git days.
Yeah.
This was,
Yeah,
I don't think, what was I doing then? I don't even remember.
Caxy used to have a really big
something on Windows.
We used to have a big subversion and track setup. Did everyone ever use track?
No.
It's sort of like if Confluence were tied into Git, sort of. It was a really interesting idea, and and then we just blew it up because we went to Git. Brayden or Katie, have you guys ever putting your neck out on Stack Overflow?
No, I definitely thought about it a bunch of times when I first started learning development. And then you look at the responses that people get when they are newer and people are not very kind. So I never got around to it then. And to Josh's point, then I got to a certain point where you don't have any credibility to do that. So I just have never bothered to.
Good.
Yeah, and I think I just created an actual account for Stack Overflow 2 weeks ago, I think. And then I found out you had to have credibility, even to vote. You can't even up or down vote the answers without having some level of credibility. So then it's well, I don't know. I may or may not ever even get the amount needed to even just vote on an answer that I've decided worked for me.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll see.
Well, here's the thing. Whoever is out there asking and answering those questions, we thank you.
Yes.
You're very helpful. That's great. Okay, so quick take, and if you want to take a second to think about it. I saw something on Programmer Humor, I think this morning or yesterday. It's probably a repost. But if you were to ask the question that programming is 90% X and 10% Y, what would your answer be to that?
Oh, related. It's 90% Googling, 10% coding.
I'm hard pressed to disagree. I think maybe you could say it's more problem solving or something than it is anything. Like, most of the time is understanding or solving a problem rather than like implementing.
I'm gonna say it's 10% of what you might have learned in college, and 90% just writing similar APIs over and over again.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. It's like, but I think it could be reversed on like what sort of like thing you're working on. Like if you're focused on like more of like a back-end or structural problem, I think it's kind of like 90% architecture and like determining how you want it to fit together and work. So everything has a solid foundation, and then it's like 10% implementation. Whereas like if you're doing something more, front end where you're just hooking up stuff that already exists, then a lot of times that's less thought work because the architecture for that's already been determined or is somewhat determined by like the back end structure. So then it ends up being like mostly implementation on the reverse side of that.
As you guys were talking, one of the things that occurs to me, at least in my experience, is it's like, like anything that you get good at when depicted in a movie, the movie version is always ridiculous, right? So if you're really good at whatever it is, like I have to imagine that people who are tightrope walkers are watching a movie about tightrope and go, this is not anything like it. Like whenever someone's got a guitar in a TV show, they're not playing that chord. They're not even holding it right. Why are we doing this? And, of course the hackers on TV, whatever. But I feel like a lot of what I do is, it would be weird to write, like you'd never write, 100 lines of code without testing or without trying to run it, right? So I feel like a lot of it is like it's write something small and then sort of like play and toy with it for a second, whatever, then come back, fix, edit. But it's not maybe this is like, what is it not? It's not 90% typing, right? It's some of the things we've said today are like it's 90% thinking or Googling or whatever it is. It's slow, methodical, accurate progress as opposed to like you're not going out and running down the street programming or something.
Yeah, it's definitely not like lines of
totally.
code, I like that kind of takes me back to college where, you hear from, back when I was in college, you heard from people who were in the industry in like the 80s through the 90s, maybe even the 70s, and they it was very important how many lines of code they wrote back in the day, and I was like, no, that sounds terrible. That's a terrible metric.
So how much of that difference is, I guess, to do with more products or like software as a service and like the packaging that like exists in JavaScript, for example? Almost anything you could want exists as like a code as a service or like OAuth or what is it, Auth. I always get the and then like just packages in general, where like Lodash has all of these functions that like probably were written and rewritten in older or much older applications.
Yeah, I think a lot of the
good point.
typing has become, scaffolded. There's, instead of typing, 100 model classes with all getters and setters in it, you just generate that easily just from a quick schema and stuff like that. So I think a lot of it also has come down to just the, speeding things up in terms of developer efficiency. Because I do remember there was a point where I remember just typing for a long time of like, generating models and adding getters and setters, and there's so much boilerplate where there was a point where I could just like continuously type without really thinking about what I was doing, because I had to create so many different things where it was just kind of like a repeated process of a copy paste, updating, blah blah blah. Yeah. And I think that's become a lot less common now. And I like to often I like to get to the point where I can code as fast as I can think. And so that's like with an IDE, I think is also really helpful with, autocomplete, and there's a bunch of, snippets that you can generate and insert and things like that. And I think that has become, that has made it where it's a lot less typing and more of the actual, like, you get to the thought process part a lot faster.
Yeah, I like that. And I think the trajectory is it keeps going that direction, and we keep being able to do higher and higher level things faster and faster. And I think about like, the things we've done, like I saw a demo today of something you were working on where it was like this seemingly amazing scheduling calendar infrastructure thing that was like, oh, this is out of the box, great. Now I can do my interesting custom thing for the client without inventing something that really doesn't need to be invented. We've played with a video platform that's like, a two-way video thing like this would have really scared me 5 years ago. And like so we're recording this on Riverside.fm. This kind of feels like something we could do in a few months as opposed to never / a few years, which is like a big deal. You think about how far those things have come and like, the tools AWS gives you with, scaling and Kubernetes and, Lambdas and all this stuff that's like, God, that would have been its own infrastructure project on its own. And now it's just like, oh, bloop, 8 cents an hour or whatever. Insane pricing they have on that,
Yeah, I think it's interesting how some of the things in our realm have kind of gone that way where, like, certain specific, how do I want to say this? Somebody else has done the heavy lifting in an iterative way over decades, and now that's a service. Like the scaling problem, or I always go back to the example of game engines. I mean, like Unreal Engine 5. I don't know if you've seen the tech demos, but it's like mind-blowing, insane, like nearly photoreal. And if you go back and look at the first Unreal, it was chunky, but that was 20 years ago. And in 20 years, we've gone from that to photoreal, and now their engine is a service. If you want to make a game with it, actually, it's free, and like they don't get paid until you hit. I can't remember what the model is, but like you have to sell so many units or whatever before they even get paid.
And the tools to create those games now, they make it so easy. I mean, it's still like, it's tough. You still have to ramp up on it, but it's accessible to people. And with Unity, I was amazed because I've always been hesitant to even try to get into it because I'm like, I'm not an animator. Like I couldn't get the models. Yeah. And then I found out that there's a store where you can download free models and animations and everything. Great. And so now, as a developer, I don't need you. I can create a game. Yeah. Just coding away and buying, paying $50 for someone's, kit that they created.
So what's ripe for that kind of thing now? Is there anything that we're doing or you're doing that's sort of like, God, this seems like something somebody should servicize or roll up that I'm doing over and over again?
I mean, I'm amazed that we still build logins and just basic CRUD. Like I'm just so surprised that that hasn't been commoditized in a way that makes sense. Like obviously there's single sign-on services and everything like that, but there's still a decent bit of integration to do with that. So
yeah, I think also content management. Although there's been some recent, I guess, updates in that realm, but that's still kind of a tricky one. I think that like a lot of businesses want to do, and it's just there's no like one good answer for how to do that.
Yeah, I do wonder if there will be a point where the web goes from a MySpace world where everyone is customizing their own thing to more of a Facebook world, and that's an old reference, I guess now. But the idea is, right now everyone wants their own marketing site that has their own animations and it looks unique and different. But I wonder if at some point we're all just going to say a website's a website, and we just care about the content. Like give me the content, and obviously there's always going to be a place for making a really flashy one. But I think a mom and pop shop probably doesn't need a fully customized, designed website. So I think that I wonder if that'll be in a future state of the web.
It's interesting, kind of tying back where we started about scraping. If you've ever been to Google and look for a restaurant, they've got the menu often, and I guess I'm kind of guessing that maybe they scraped it or something. Like there isn't necessarily the need to upload your menu. It's like Google will find it. Do you really need that? It's like as long as the data is there, it'll let it in a functional way. And even on the marketing side of things, I feel like there was a day when people wanted, like a 20-page marketing site with an individual page for everything. And now it's like, it seems like most of those are like one-pagers. And you just sort of like, here's a basic idea. We're tired. Just call us. I think that's sort of that's where it's going. Or just forget that. Just go to something else.
I was going to say, you see a lot of the smaller businesses nowadays just want their like social media presence because they can put information about it on there. They don't even necessarily need to have that as like a separate individualized
Yeah,
site.
lots of small businesses run purely off Facebook, like Marketplace, or just relying on their Facebook business profile, like coming up through Google or something, or even just the Google posting without the website, because there's always lots of good information there, like the menu, like you pointed out.
Or people post pictures.
Yeah, or people
of the menu or whatever,
I do wonder, maybe it's a different topic for another time, but I've noticed that Google is starting to issue more and more content up front from the Google search results page from websites that it crawled. And oftentimes you don't even need to click into the site to get what you were looking for. And I'm curious if that's does that take away traffic to that site? Does that then ultimately harm that site if they had ads on it and things like that? And I'm curious, like Wikipedia, I notice now whenever I search for something that typically I would have gone to Wikipedia like as a first result, it's now mostly just on Google. Yeah. And I haven't been to Wikipedia for a while now, just because most of the data is there.
That's a good point. Because I think like many people, I use Wikipedia primarily to settle bets. And so
arguments.
Right, like what year did such and such come out? And then you look at it, and you're right, the result is the Google result of Wikipedia being scraped, which is now legal or whatever. And it's 1947. Fine, that's enough.
So I think I don't remember when or how long ago, but I believe that there were court cases in other countries, not the U.S., on that. And I believe that there are some countries where like Google has to pay the people that they're showing articles for. Because they're not getting the click through, and so to get the revenue that they claim that they're missing from Google, sometimes I guess they copy the whole article too, and like there's like a specific type of Google link where then like someone clicks something and they still didn't get the traffic, and so there are things like that where those things are and have been in court already to like try to get their money.
Well, I also wonder what would happen in a case like that. Like if someone was just doing Google search or like scraping from Google and they just take whole chunks of something, but then they're not providing like citation for what it is. So essentially they're plagiarizing, something that someone wrote themselves or like content from someone else without giving credit where credit's due.
And Brayden, I think you're talking about those AMP mobile pages that seemed to be really hot for a while and then kind of weren't. And I don't know, you guys have been doing more SEO stuff. Does that resonate?
It does resonate.
It seems like people aren't asking.
It's still mentioned, like I still think about it and I wonder if we should do it, but also it hasn't been pushed for at all.
I think what I read, the last thing I read, and it changes every day, so someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but that there's no longer a preference to them. So it's like Google offers this product if you want it, but also if you'd like the traffic, we won't make you do it, kind of thing. So I think it was designed to be faster, but then it's like, when you think about like some things that used to be limiting, like storage and internet speed and some other stuff, have become such a non-factor that it's like, to really even think about, like it's probably not a great idea, but a web page with like a 100 meg video on it or something looping, and there's just a background effect is sort of like whatever, maybe. I mean, that's probably an exaggeration, but those problems aren't as as much of an issue as they were even 5 years ago, probably. Well, cool. So let's end Chatty Caxy there. Chatty Caxy is brought to you by Caxy Interactive. We're a custom software development company, and this podcast is all about members of our team talking about things that we care about and think are interesting. In a dream world, if you were someone who wanted to be on the team or a client that wanted to work with us, this kind of content is something you connect with and you'd like to hear more about. So if any of those are the case, be sure to get in touch with us.